My name is Robert Hayes. I'm 68 years old, and I never thought I'd live to see the day when my own son and his wife would treat me like I was a burden instead of the man who kept their entire life afloat. But everything truly snapped the moment my daughter-in-law picked up the birthday gifts I had bought for my grandkids, perfectly wrapped, chosen with love, and threw them straight into the kitchen trash can as if they were pieces of worthless junk. And that single moment didn't just break my heart, it awakened a side of me they never expected, because that day I decided I wouldn't stay silent anymore. And I certainly wouldn't keep letting them live off my money while treating me like I didn't matter. It started on a cold Thursday morning when I arrived at their house holding the gifts I had spent days picking out, thinking maybe this year things would feel different. Maybe my son Mark would look at me with the warmth he used to have before his wife Jenna started steering him like a remote-controlled puppet. But when I walked in and gently placed the presents on the dining table, Jenna barely acknowledged me, rolled her eyes, and said, "We don't need your cheap gifts, Robert." And before I could even respond, she swept her manicured hand across the table, scooped the gifts up, and dumped them right into the trash bin with a loud thud, smiling in that mocking way that tells you someone enjoys hurting you. And Mark, my own son, just stood there frozen, not defending me, not stopping her, just staring at the floor like a scared child who wasn't allowed to have a voice in his own home. I felt something crack inside me right then, a quiet kind of anger. The kind you only feel after years of being disrespected by the same people you raised, protected and provided for, and I simply said, "Okay," walked back to my car, and drove home in silence. But the second I stepped into my living room, I remembered something neither of them had ever bothered to think about. Every bill in that house. The mortgage they bragged about paying, the utilities, the cars they drove, even the furniture they thought they bought on sale. Every last thing was still under my name, because after Mark lost his job 2 years ago and Jenna was drowning in credit card debt, she kept hidden from him. I stepped in, refinanced the home, covered their overdue payments, and made sure they didn't lose everything, and they swore they would take over the payments in a few months. But they never did, and because they never did, I never transferred the house title, meaning everything they thought they owned was still legally mine. And that realization didn't make me feel vindictive. It just reminded me that I wasn't helpless. And the next day when I walked into my attorney's office to review the documents, he looked at me and said, "Robert, you're in complete control here." And for the first time in years, I felt the weight on my chest lift. I didn't plan revenge. I planned boundaries, solid, legal boundaries, starting with the utilities. Because I walked over to my computer and canceled my auto pay for their electricity, water, and internet. Then I paused for a moment and canceled the insurance on both of the cars they drove, the same cars I bought for them when Jenna claimed hers accidentally broke down. And on Saturday morning at exactly 10:32, my phone rang with Mark's name flashing on the screen for the first time in months, but I let it ring and ring until Jenna's number popped up next, and then Mark again, and finally a text. "Dad, the power went out. Did you forget to pay something?" And I simply replied, "Nothing was forgotten," and minutes later they showed up at my door red-faced and panicking, demanding an explanation, and I opened the door calmly, motioned for them to sit, and once they were both trembling with frustration, I pulled out the stack of documents showing every dollar I had paid for them, the mortgage statements, the utility bills, the car receipts, insurance payments, credit card balances I helped settle, thousands and thousands of dollars worth of support, and I said, "You threw my gifts in the trash, Jenna, but that trash can is the only thing in your home that's actually yours?" And the silence that followed was thick as concrete. Jenna tried to regain her confidence and snapped, "You can't just cut off the power. That's illegal. The house is ours." And I slid the title toward her, tapped the name printed on it mine, and watched the color drain from her face as she read it 3, 4, 5 times, trying to make the words change, but they didn't. Because reality doesn't bend for people who live off lies. And Mark, my son, who used to hug me so tightly when he was little, just stared at the paper like it was a stranger's handwriting, whispering, "Dad, why didn't you tell me this?" And I answered quietly, "I didn't want to embarrass you." But Jenna quickly demanded I fix everything immediately, calling me selfish and dramatic, so I stood up, walked over to the kitchen counter, picked up a small bag, and pulled out the real gift. I had planned to give them the written agreement drafted by my lawyer stating that if they wanted to keep living in that house, they would take full responsibility for every bill, transfer the mortgage into their names within 60 days, repay a portion of the debt I covered, and agree to stop disrespecting me, because I wasn't going to spend the last years of my life financing my own mistreatment. Jenna exploded, yelling, threatening, saying they'd just move somewhere else, and I nodded and said, then move, because I knew they couldn't, no savings, number credit approval, no backup plan, and Mark realized it too because he looked at Jenna with an expression I had never seen before, disappointment mixed with awakening. She stormed out of my house, slamming the door so hard it rattled the frames, and Mark stayed behind, slumped into my couch like a boy again, and whispered, Dad. I'm sorry, and I could hear the sincerity, the fear, the guilt in his voice, but I also knew this apology came from being cornered by consequences, not respect, so I placed a hand on his shoulder and said, You don't have to be sorry, son. You just have to grow up. And I meant it, because sometimes love requires boundaries so sharp they cut through denial. Over the next 2 weeks, the tone in their home shifted. Jenna became quiet, nervous, overly polite whenever she called, and Mark started showing up alone, asking for advice, asking for help managing finances on his own. And on the kids' birthdays, he asked me to come over personally. And when I walked in with new gifts, no one dared throw them anywhere except into the children's arms. And the most surprising part happened when little Emma, my granddaughter, hugged my leg tightly and said, Grandpa, Mommy said you saved our home, which told me everything I needed to know. Jenna understood the lesson, whether she admitted it or not. Over time, they took over their responsibilities, they paid their own bills, they learned to stand without leaning on my wallet, and our relationship slowly rebuilt itself on a foundation of truth instead of entitlement. And while I'll never forget the sight of those gifts in the trash, I also know that moment was necessary, because sometimes people only appreciate what they have when they see how easily it can disappear. And as for the house, the title still sits safely in my drawer, waiting for the day my son earns it, not by blood, but by behavior. And until then, I live peacefully knowing that I finally taught them the lesson life never managed to teach them. Respect isn't bought with money, but it can certainly stop being funded.